Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading property experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle channel, and Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the 2014 and 2015 Property Investment Advisors of the Year.
All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch where each week Ben and I bring you the insider's guide to property finance and money management, mate. So, middle of January, in the thick of the summer series, how good is this?
It's good. I just want it to go forever.
I know.
I mean, and I also know the schedule we've got coming up. So, can we just keep doing this sort of stuff?
It's good, isn't it? Because we get all the thought leaders, the heavy hitters in the property space, and today's no different. We've got Stuart Wemyss. This is his third appearance on the Property Couch, Ben.
Yes.
Episode 81.
We'd love to have him on.
Go back to episode 81. Backstory.
He explains things so simply.
Yeah, he's a thought leader. And then episode 172, which we had a chat because he's second book? Third book, yes.
Investopoly, yes.
Investopoly.
Bestseller now.
Yes.
Since we've had him on, so congratulations on that as well.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks, boys. Thanks for having me.
How's summer treating you?
Fantastic. It's always enjoyable to spend a bit of time down the beach.
Wonderful. But we wanted to get you in for a couple of reasons. One, to look in the rear vision mirror, and one, to get your crystal ball out. So let's start with the rear vision mirror. What did you take of 2018 in the property market space? Because there's a few layers for you, because you're involved in mortgage broking and property and a whole range of things.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly hasn't been a dull year, and we say that every year, but I think this is a standout year, and I imagine as the Royal Commission hands down their report soon, in a few months' time, I imagine this year is going to be just as challenging, I guess, as 2018. But I think probably the biggest thing, I saw a lot of noise around the negative gearing and the ALP policies and so forth, but the biggest thing in our business has been the challenges around lending.
Yep. You were going to go there. The good old credit crunch.
Yes. Yeah. So I'd be really interested to see, again, what falls out of the Royal Commission and then the bank's response to that, because they could be connected or disconnected. But I think it needs to loosen up. It's gone way too far.
Are we calling it enough is enough?
Enough is enough. Enough is enough, definitely. And I've looked at the long-term sort of trend in terms of volumes of investment owner-occupied lending adjusted for inflation. They're back in line with how they used to be, decades prior. So I think even at a macro level, it's sort of showing that what they wanted to do, they've probably achieved. And I think there's also a bit of a lag effect too, right, guys? I mean, you have a conversation with a client 6 months ago, no, you can't invest, you can't do what you want to do. And then they might put it on ice for a little while and then come back and then feel like then they've got to find an alternative strategy to achieve their lifestyle and financial goals. So I think the tightening in credit will probably take, a couple of years to really filter through its full effects. And that's why I think the government needs to really do something sooner rather than later.
Just on that point, I was listening to an interview with Ross Greenwood and one of Australia's biggest brick manufacturers. Now, you think, right, what's that got to do with property? Well, a hell of a lot, right? A lot of properties are built with bricks. And he was saying at the end of last year that there was a real pause through September, October around construction. So it just died like it did. And so the orders for bricks just weren't coming through. So he's like, this business is 50% of all bricks manufactured in Australia, right?
Wow.
So he's got market dominance. He's the biggest business. And he was like, went back to his, what's going on? Here's the story. The people who signed the contracts for house and land then go away and they're in a queue. And so obviously these houses take time to build. And so 8 months ago they signed their contract, the land title comes through, and they announce to the customer, look, we'll be ready to go in about 3 weeks. Now, a credit policy or pre-approval lasts for 90 days, doesn't it? Right? So 90 days, so they've gone back to their lender and said, just want to reconfirm our construction loan. And the lender's gone, well, no, I can't confirm it for you. Sorry? Well, we need to have another look at it. And he was saying that there was 8 weeks, another 8 weeks was added to that lending approval process. So there was just this void in his business because the lenders have to tighten up in terms of their pre-approvals. And it is the constant theme that we're getting from all of our experts that this is a manufactured correction that may have gone too far. And that's a perfect example of how it affects the real world. So all those tradies are off, they can't start that project, they've got to look for someone who's got money approved. So I think you're right. It's
happened in
going to
Perth too during their boom, but the other way, right? Because Perth's always double brick. Well, not always, but a lot of double brick over in Perth. So they had the companies that just could not supply them. Right? They absolutely just ran out of bricks. So I'm interested in your take on credit crunch and what you do, because in your space as a mortgage broker, because the Royal Commission, you know, maybe some of the banks have had an opportune pot shot at the mortgage brokers, and so that's going forward. There's been a few different approaches, but clearly you would advocate that someone would use a mortgage broker because you are one, right? But what do you think would be the disadvantage if that wasn't to be the case as it is now? If it was a fee for service or the power went back to the banks, where do you see the biggest disadvantage to the consumer would be in that approach?
I think in the home loan or mortgage market, it's probably gone through sort of three phases, if you like. There was kind of a pre-Aussie phase, so pre-early 1990s, where the margins were incredibly fat, got close to sort of 4%. They're closer to 2% today. And then so they contracted from 4% firstly because primarily in the early 90s because of Aussie John came out with Aussie Home Loans, Will Save You, and that brought a tremendous amount of competition into the market. I think then the second phase, and then there was an emergence of sort of second-tier lenders similar to Aussie John, and it became a more fragmented space. Not very fragmented, but just more fragmented.
Wholesale funding was cheaper to get offshore,
Yep.
and that gave them the advantage because obviously they didn't have deposits, which meant that their cost of money was a little bit higher,
Yep.
but their cost of operation was lower
Yep.
because they used brokers as a distribution.
And then I think the next wave of competition was brokers. You know, that brokers then broke down the barriers, I guess, between, or the impediment to comparing a whole bunch of lenders and understanding, because obviously it's interest rates and fees. For a mum and dad that have got a home loan, that's probably their primary concern. But if you're an investor, it's really about borrowing capacity and credit policy and loan structure. I mean, everything is important, right? But they're components that I would say are equally and sometimes more important than interest rate. I'd rather pay an extra 0.5% and implement my strategy than get the absolute lowest rate but not be able to invest. And I think everyone's going to agree with that. So if it goes fee for service and it cripples the industry, what happens when you sort of take margin out of an industry or revenue out of industry? You can't have everything. You know, you service and advice will suffer. I mean, people that have that knowledge and expertise will either charge a premium or go to a different industry. So I think it will kind of dumb down the mortgage broking industry and commoditize it a lot. And worst case scenario is it strangles it and the industry just dies or becomes a mere fraction of what it is today. So it's, I mean, okay, is there a conflict of interest there because you get paid a commission? Yeah, of course there is. But can I sell you a mortgage if you don't need one? I mean, it's hard, isn't it? You're walking down the street and I say, come on, Ben, go and borrow another $2 million. You go, you'd look at me, you know, what are you talking about? So it's different to other products that are commission based. You know, you can convince someone to invest in property. You can't convince someone to take out a mortgage unless they're going to do something with it. So it'll be an interesting space. Of course, the banks would love to take the opportunity. And they sort of did it, obviously, when the GFC came around in 2008, they cut commissions, and you know, even there was a lot of talk about some of the banks moving out of that space when their volume reduced and they've got people in branches twiddling their thumbs doing nothing. And then I think this is another opportunity for the banks to do that under the guise of, well, it's in the customer's best interest.
Never waste a crisis.
Yeah, well, I think
it's... make change in a crisis.
It's evident, right? I mean, the stats speak for themselves. Early 1990s, I mean, the origins of broking came out of the UK for us, and it started in Western Australia, and you had AFG and you had Mortgage Choice started out of there, then Aussie John was in Sydney. They were the pioneers of the industry, which went from 0% market share to now sitting at 55%. So we absolutely know this is an orchestrated move. You know, this is the cynic in me coming out by the banks to get back in control, because if they can manipulate the customer choice and make it harder for the customer to choose a broker because they've only got a product to sell, right? They're manufacturers. They're not necessarily, so that they don't want to lose that opportunity to distribute, because if they do that, they don't get the cross-sell opportunity.
Yep.
So we absolutely know that margins will improve for the banks and profitability will be better for the banks. Now, how is that a good outcome for the customer? I mean, how is that not evident? And when I look at the Productivity Commission and I look at the way in which the banks have used the opportunity of the Royal Commission to sell an agenda of fees in terms of, and conflicts in terms of commission-led payments, that's all about reducing their cost base. But also, if they can move the industry from 12 or 13,000 brokers down to 5,000 brokers, then all of a sudden they're back in control. They're back in power. And I can't see how that's in the best interest of a customer.
The other interesting thing too is the insurance industry's just got their head around the changes of commission structure that is just coming to force this month, in fact. And what they're trying to do is transition insurance brokers away from a heavy upfront commission to more of a balanced commission level. And there's lots of reasons for that, but one of the main ones was really about trying to promote a relationship, rather than just selling a product and then the insurance advisor moves on, but really having a relationship with the client and then also providing that ongoing review and advice and so forth. So if the government's decided that's what's best for the insurance industry, should we then take a completely different view to the mortgage broking industry or the mortgage industry? I think hopefully common sense prevails and people understand, well, we do need that ongoing help and that they do facilitate some tremendous amount of competition.
Because we have seen the financial planning industry move to fee-for-service, which is a great thing, except for insurances. And the argument for that is that consumers won't pay for insurances if it comes out of their pocket. They don't mind if it's coming out of the premium, and that's how mortgage brokers get paid. At the end of the day, we're taking a slither of interest in terms of the overall cost. And in a lot of cases, we're a cheaper form of distribution than through the retail or branch network. Okay, so you put those two things together and they prosecuted their case, but less upfront, so there's no churn and more consistency around that. We're seeing a Royal Commission that's more than likely that's going to recommend trail commissions be banned. Now, my view on that, and we've seen what's happened in the UK, is you're going to get churn. You're absolutely going to get churn, but also in terms of what we use trail in our business for, as you know, Bryce, is we're developing a client portal, we're giving people education around money management. That's all coming from that money, right? So we're reinvesting that money to teach our clients how to manage money better, to make sure they trap that surplus and they can put that money to create wealth. The same sort of thing I'm assuming you're doing in your business, Stuart.
And the biggest distinction between insurance, mortgages and financial planning, which obviously, as you said, fee for service, is that for most insurance brokers and mortgage brokers, they give you whole of market advice. They don't deal with every single lender in Australia. That's impossible. But by market share, they deal with lenders that have 99% of the mortgage market.
Hundreds and hundreds of products.
Where it's not the case with financial planners. Most financial planners don't give whole of market advice. They deal in shares or managed funds but not property, or sometimes property but not managed funds.
Yeah.
And so that's the distinction. That's why commissions don't work in financial planning, because often the products that do pay a commission are the ones you should never invest in. Whereas it's not the same. Commissions are uniform in mortgages and insurance, and you're able to give whole of market advice.
What's your read of the tea leaves on where you see it might go with the recommendations come out? You've got to have a suspension of disbelief, I guess. I disbelieve that we could be so stupid to make a policy that reduces competition in a market where you've got 4 lenders with more than 80% market share.
With no proven systemic risk.
No.
There's, the Royal Commission found maybe 3 or 4 broker experiences that were questionable at best in terms of doing the right. I mean, you could do a Royal Commission into doctors and find 3 or 4 doctors who aren't doing the right. So no systemic risk. APRA has prevented any future systemic risk, and yet still the powers that be, the big banks, are seeing this opportunity to change for their own benefit and not necessarily for client outcome.
And hopefully that's pretty transparent to the government. So hopefully there's no change and the broker industry continues to thrive, and the Australian public will be beneficiaries of that.
Well, for a couple of reasons. One, there's a lot of jobs at stake, and two, it's in the best interest of the consumer. So it'd be mad to change it. Okay, let's put the crystal ball out. So clearly, credit crunch was a big thing for 2018. Moving forward, what's your interpretation of the changes to negative gearing and what impact that'll have on the property market?
Well, if we look back in 85 to 87, when it was banned, it put pressure on rental yields, and obviously investors are going to seek to recoup some of that. Obviously it only applies to new investments moving forward, but those investors are still going to probably seek to offset some of that higher holding cost by increasing rental yields. That'll shift the market. Then, existing investors will go, if they're getting more, I should put the rent up as well. So I think it's going to have pressure on the market, and given that circa one third of Australians rent, is it really solving that housing affordability problem, or is it just making and renters socioeconomically probably are going to struggle? More vulnerable. So. Look, I hope it's just a way of winning votes, but when it really comes down to it, the lobbyists and common sense wins, and it doesn't get implemented. If it does get implemented, I hope it's in a limited application. So whether that's you can gear 1 or 2 properties or a certain amount per year and cap it at that. It's to at least allow people to proactively try and build wealth. Okay, you might not necessarily want to facilitate people going and building a portfolio of 10 properties with millions of dollars of equity, but you certainly want to help the average Australian go out there and at least invest in one property to supplement superannuation. So, and if it does come in, I imagine it's probably going to be, we'll repeat history again, and it'll be in for a couple of years, and it'll be abolished because they'll realise that it wasn't the right decision. So I can't see really moving forward a situation where we're going to not have negative gearing for a long period of time.
I hope that that's going to be the case. So in terms of, given the credit crunch as well, what are you now educating your pending clients on around getting finance? Are you flagging with them like we are, 3 months, 6 months, get your house in order, don't spend anything, don't do anything stupid, don't use Uber Eats, they'll, little things like that.
Yeah, look, I think it's a combination of both client education in terms of educating them how things have changed, and with comprehensive credit reporting as well. The banks know a whole lot more about you today than certainly what they did a couple of years ago, and it's just a completely different landscape. So there's that education piece, I think, and then it's also the strategy as well. Going back a few years ago, it would be a pretty good strategy to go and acquire a number of properties with a view to potentially selling one close to into retirement, reducing debt, and then obviously that improves your cash flow position, also net equity position. Well, that's a lot harder to do these days, right? So you might not be able to buy 3 properties, sell 1, keep 2, and there's your retirement strategy. So we've got to look at a more integrated approach, I think, which could be a combination. And sometimes I think we're a bit one-dimensional when we think about property as well. So it could be a combination of, using super, additional contributions so that we can build that balance. So that's a debt retirement strategy as well. Or instead of trying to spread our investment budget across a couple of properties, maybe we're because of our budget constraints, maybe we've got to put it into one really good property. So levelling up in terms of quality as well, which we all know in the long run will deliver, or should deliver, logically, superior returns. So I think it's a combination of both those things, but I think we've got to make friends with the fact that from a credit perspective, it might loosen up, but it's never going to get back to where it was, in my opinion.
So are you still saying to your clients, like we did, that if you're in a position to borrow a good amount of money and be in control of your liquidity, has that changed in any way? Are you still sort of saying get the maximum that you can to control and be flexible in your strategy?
Even more so now, I think, because previously the amount that someone could borrow was typically always higher than the amount they should borrow from a safety perspective. That's not the case now. And quite often what they could borrow and it's safe to do, that they can't actually even get that amount. So I think even more now, maximising your borrowable equity, revaluing properties, re-looking at it every 6 months and so forth. And sometimes that might require you to switch lenders, because lenders will ebb and flow in terms of their policies and borrowing capacities. But being more proactive in that space, it's a scarce resource, right? And it's just got scarcer.
Yeah.
So it
Makes
needs
sense.
even more attention.
Yeah, we're the same.
You wrote a blog article last year about the old school flats, right? Apartments in Melbourne, and you sort of said, well, they haven't done so well for a little while, but you see opportunity. Can you embellish a bit on that?
So going back about 8 years ago in Melbourne, we were building around about 15 to 20,000 new apartments each year, and that peaked about 4 years ago at 35,000 apartments. Now, if we say that population in Melbourne's growing a million people every decade, let's even that out and go 100,000 people. So 100,000 people, population increase in Melbourne, 35,000 apartments. 35% of people, most of those apartments are obviously close to CBD, right? So 35% of people that move to Melbourne or are in Melbourne aren't going to want to go and live in a CBD apartment. So clearly that was too much. We saw a major contraction last year in terms of completions and pipeline activity. There was a major development in Latrobe Street that got repurposed. It was going to be nearly 500 residential apartments. It's now going to be office. So obviously developers are struggling to get finance to actually develop the properties, and then when it comes to actually selling the end product, the people are having trouble getting finance. So I think it'll be a supply side. It'll be a supply side driven impact. So I think the supply of new apartments will reduce dramatically, and should reduce. Well, I think we've been building too many.
Yep.
And as a result, and also at the same time, the apartments that were built in the last 5 years will start to look very old. A lot of wear and tear, their sound insulation's terrible, low ceilings. They're nice to live in perhaps in the first couple of years when everything's shiny and new and everything's working, but they'll need a lot of maintenance. They're not built like they were building properties even 50, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think with those combination of factors, I think we'll see those older style, sort of pre-1970s style apartments move into a bit of a renaissance. And I think they'll look a lot more attractive to owner-occupiers and investors by comparison.
Look, I agree with you. In terms of segmentation, do you see that across the Metro Melbourne, or St Kilda, for example, has got a heap of old school flats, but there's a heap of them, right? Whereas if you go to Ascot Vale, for example, it's quite scarce. So what's your view on segmentation within that market?
I think we'll look geographically, and geographically there's the supply side's different as well. So if you look at that sort of South Yarra region in Melbourne, it's had a lot of supply of new build apartments. Whereas Elwood's had considerably less. So I think you've got to look geographically, and I think different markets will perform differently because of that. And then also, as Bryce said, the supply of existing apartments as well.
Well, the town planning regs are also important for areas like Elwood and Beachside, obviously in Victoria, and when we swing around the country, those types of things, your planning regs normally don't allow medium and high density out wide before they, it's sort of a ripple effect from the city out wide. So I think that's all good, which sort of brings me to a point in terms of, so we've gone back, credit crunch has been a big thing. You're still saying to the customer, release all of that equity. Are you changing any strategy direction around property selection or recommendations for 2019?
Nope. I don't think so.
We have nothing to say here.
We have an investment committee meeting every 2 months now. We were monthly up until we get more data now, so we're okay in terms of how we do things. But same thing, like, what is negative gearing going to do for you? Not much. We're going to, because we still believe in the quality of the asset, the location, and what we're doing. And owner-occupier appeal, and 70% of the population drive the market, 30% should take the position in the market.
Yep.
So nothing for you either?
Well, 9% of taxpayers negatively gear. Oh, so let's put that differently. 91% of taxpayers don't. So there's 91% of the market that will be unaffected by that impact that can still then pay more for that property that you just purchased.
Yeah.
Plus, also, if you take that long-term view and play that long game, and you look at returns since 1980. Nearly sort of circa 10% in most markets, including rental yield and growth. And over that time, you've had negative gearing being banned, you've had introduction of capital gains tax, GST, different governments.
Floating the Australian dollar, the recession we've had to have.
Yeah, share market crashes, the whole box and dice, and property still performed. So no change. And I think it's even more important at times like this where there's uncertainty to really go back to fundamentals and really trust the fundamentals. The fundamentals will work. And you've just got to have that patience and that belief in that strategy.
Yeah, we know, let's say Labor gets in and let's say they move the policy of negative gearing in place. The amount of collateral and media and advertising that's going to go out in terms of house and land packages and off the plan, seriously, it is fool's gold. It is the fundamentals will always win out. The secondary market for that stuff is going to be rubbish. Once people don't get the capital growth that they're looking for, they're just going to pull their eyes out. It's going to kill them.
My other concern is, if there's election in May this year, and then the ALP win, and they want to then implement that policy, they've obviously got to legislate it before it comes into force. What about that time period between them winning and the legislation?
The election bump.
I just don't. I actually fear that because you don't want that artificial stimulation in the market in any case. And I feel a lot of people will be driven to make a lot of short-term decisions.
So we're saying that. I mean, even though it's a summer series, we know how much stock's out there, right? So our buyers agents, they're in right now, just sort of because, and our smarter clients are all going. Yep. Well, I mean, the way in which Scott Morrison announced that the budget's going to be the 4th of April. So that is the first indication that he's not going early unless his government implodes, right, which he'll be forced to go early when there's a no confidence motion on him, which is what Labor's trying to do, right? But that won't happen, it's not going to happen now. We're in January, they're going to get through. So from that point of view, we're now at a situation where, okay, well, we know that it's definitely going to be May. So I tell you what, February, March, April, good time to buy. If you want a complete insurance policy.
But don't be complacent because what we're saying here is it takes a bigger run up to get your finance. And then it takes a little bit of time to buy it, and it takes a little bit of time to settle. So
we had a record month of activity in December in terms of trying to get that lending organised because of exactly that. People are lining up and saying, "Okay, I get it now. I get it."
Hey, any sort of other observations that you see in just the investment landscape in general? Because I know that you're, in mortgages and property, but you're also in the financial services space. So super, anything else you see for 2019?
Yeah, I mean, super's been a big one, again, coming out of the Royal Commission, and also the Productivity Commission did a report on it as well. And people are leaving retail funds in droves. So, funds AMP, MLC, and the likes of those managers, and that's a good thing. They in most cases they should, because they're typically low returns, high fees. And Australian Super, which is the largest industry fund in Australia, has seen like a 50% increase in funds flow. Just last year they received in new money around about $15 billion. So it's pretty amazing. So I guess the thing facing us is that, and the thing that the Productivity Commission said as well, is that not all industry funds are
good ones either.
Are good ones, yeah, correct. So in terms of picking a super fund, the things that I would look at is fees. Fees are certain, returns are not. And even though Host Plus, which is another industry fund, was at the top of the league table last financial year in terms of returns, its fees are about 1.4%, where Aussie Super is about 0.66%. So a big difference there. Might not seem like a big difference in percentage terms, but in real terms, in the long run, it can make a big difference, even assuming the returns with both funds are exactly the same. And I'd look for scale as well. So Aussie Super is massive, much larger than Host Plus. I'm not picking on Host Plus, but much larger than lots of industry super funds. So logic would tell us that they should be able to deliver their service at a lower cost and an increasingly lower cost, which they are doing at the moment. So I'm pretty fond of Aussie Super. But if you've got more than, say, a couple of $100,000, I think there's better opportunities. So putting it into a sort of wrap style product creates a lot more transparency and accountability. So it's typically lower cost than an industry fund, and you've got complete transparency in terms of what you're paying for investment management, what you're paying for administration fees, and if you've got an advisor, what you're paying them, and you can hold all those three parties accountable. and you can adopt a much better investment strategy, so low cost index, that's really proven to generate better returns. So,
and what about Smurfs? What about self-managed super funds and property? I mean, we hear another one for Labor in terms of they were going to drop gearing inside super funds if they get in. So, have you got any views around self-managed super funds?
I would say have a very, very clear methodology or investment strategy on how you're actually going to utilise that self-managed super fund and why it's necessary. Because I think the vast majority of people that set up self-managed super funds in the last 10 years have thought, that's a good idea, I'll do that. They put their money in it and then they forget to actually do something with the money.
It's a bit like all the effort that goes into planning the wedding and no effort that goes into planning a life.
It's
a bit the same.
Yeah, that's it. So have a really clear understanding. Unless you've got a really complex situation, some estate planning matters, I would say you're better off to have your super invested in a wrap platform or in an industry fund, unless you want to invest in direct property, which we know from a lending perspective can be difficult to implement. Still not impossible, and it still has merit as well. So I think it's not to be
still case
disregarded.
by case.
Still case by case. But most parts, I think a lot of people have self-managed super funds that don't need them.
We've done the same. There's a lot of people who come in with self-managed. We're saying, what are you doing? Are you doing property? Doing direct property? Why you got this fund? Who set it up for you? Oh, I don't know. Someone said me accountant said order. It's like, I don't think you need it. Like if you're not going to be active and you don't know the investment, whereas if some people come in and say, no, I've set it up purely for property. It's okay. Well, we'll go and put you with a financial planning team. They'll give us an idea of what's possible, and then we'll go and do the asset selection.
Sure.
Do you see property in super funds, self-managed super funds, on the horizon for the foreseeable future, or do you think that at some point they might sort of say no?
I think the lenders have probably answered that question for us. So that's probably the big question. I think will the government change the legislation? I think it's less likely now that the lenders have really constricted supply. There's been I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but a tremendous amount that's gone into equally commercial and residential property into super as a result of those lending changes. I think that if that continued, the government would be worried about it. But I think when we see the fresh numbers, they would have gone off the face of a cliff. So I don't think there'll be any changes there, which is good, by the way. I think to be a bit more prudent about whether it fits within a strategy, I think is a good thing. It's still doable, as we said, but it's a lot harder. You've got to jump through a lot more hoops, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing.
Always a terrific pleasure to have you on, Stuart. I think there's always heaps of wisdom that comes for anyone who wants to reach out to Stuart. We'll have his details in the show notes, but also go back and check out episode number 81, where we unpacked Stuart's backstory. And then we also had a follow-up chat on episode 172 where we talked. I think we did 5 out of your 8 golden rules. Out of your wonderful latest book. So, mate, thanks again for coming in during summer for our summer series, and we'll look forward to getting on at some stage again later in the year.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a great year.
Well, Ben. So, but until next episode,
Bryce, knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
Well said. See you next time, folks.
Want more great content from The Property Couch? If you haven't had a chance to go back to the foundational episodes, we got good news for you. Go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20 and check out the free binge guide, which gives you the insights you need from the first 20 episodes, where we unpack the foundational pillars of the insider's guide to property, finance and money management. It's completely free and available now.